Good evening, everyone. I am Capt Anil Singru, and I welcome you all to the first talk we're going to start today in a series of talks which we are going to commence, which are called Amateur Astronomy Talks. Our first speaker for the talk today is a lawyer from Bangalore. Her name is Vaneesha Jain, and Vaneesha has been following amateur astronomy for close to 1.5 decades now. So today, Vaneesha is going to take us on a beautiful journey, letting us into her world through a talk which she has aptly named Living with the Stars, a journey, her journey, my journey in the field of amateur astronomy. And before I hand over to Vaneesha, I will request all participants to keep your mics muted and your cameras off. Please do not touch your mobile phones or your computer screens or try to annotate or share your screens because all these things disturb the speaker. After the talk is over, we'll have time for questions and answers in which Vaneesha would be very glad to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you very much. Now, without taking any more time, I'll request Vaneesha to start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain Anil Singru. It's a real pleasure to be here and to speak with so many of you who are associated with astronomy in some ways and who are willing to take out the time today evening to listen to me and my journey. It's a great privilege to be able to share with you all. And honestly, this is the first time that I'm doing something like this as well. So without further ado, let me share with you what my journey in this field has been. It's been completely, full of stops and starts and motivated completely by, the draw that we all feel towards the night sky and the stars. Can you all see my screen? If someone could just confirm, then I will continue.
Yes, Vaneesha, we can see your screen. Yes, continue.
Great, thank you. So I guess I can start by sharing what to me astronomy is and what really drew me to it, why I've been so interested. So I guess the one word, if I had to use one word, it would be the word wonder. As I shared in the small write-up with you all, I was lucky enough to have very nice terrace access growing up, and I spent a lot of time there just by myself. And when you're on a terrace, you just tend to look up. If you think about it, before today's world where we have so much technology and so many other distractions, I think historically people have always looked up, and it is bound to fill you with a sense of wonder, as it did for me, to realize that we're actually stuck on a small rock that's sort of spinning around in the middle of God knows where, right? And so it's really a lesson in a lot of things, but primarily it helps to ground you, I guess, and that was something that it did for me. And one of my friends, whom we bonded over this way of thinking, really. We use this phrase whenever things get too difficult. We say, look at this problem from the Neptune point of view, situate yourself on Neptune or somewhere else, and you see how, it puts things in perspective. You see how your problems or even your planet is really not the end of the world, so to speak. Astronomy in general, the universe, celestial bodies, everything we know about it, physics and math itself, have for me been inspiration for creativity in the form of art and poetry. Unfortunately, I'm not as gifted in mathematics as I'd like to be. But it's something that has always been, again, full of wonder and magic. So, some people say when you study science and when you understand how things work, it takes away some of the magic. But for me, that's not true. I think it augments the magic when you understand a little bit about how things actually work. It's also fueled the curiosity that one innately has. I think all children grew up asking a lot of questions about how things work, you know, and I guess the most common question is why to everything. And I remember since I was interested, there were always these little booklets or these little facts that you'd read. And, you know, honestly, I think facts are stranger than fiction, because some of the facts that you come across on the composition of planets, or to think about how we even know the things that we know in astronomy, has really been fascinating for me. One of the facts, for example, is that everything that we say so confidently about, you know, calculating distances, the temperature of planets, the you know, that some planets are primarily gaseous, how far they are from us, and to even calculate with exact precision how we're going to land a spacecraft on a different celestial object, such as the moon or now on Mars even, while the Earth itself, as well as the other planets, are spinning in rotating and revolving at unimaginable speeds through space. We've done all of that simply uh, with the faculty of sight. Really, all we have, we can't touch objects that are outside of the Earth. We can only see. And once the telescope was invented, we got to see a bit more clearly. But to me, that's fascinating, that everything we know and we've been able to calculate with so much precision is based simply on the faculty of vision and reason. So that's something that I think is great, and the curiosity that fuels this exploration is something that I think is innate in human nature, and something that's that finds for me a lot of satisfaction in astronomy. It's also given me a sense of connection, in the sense that you know, when I used to look at the moon, I used to think that I am in a certain place. But if I were to move somewhere else in the world, anywhere in a different city or a different location, when I'm looking at the moon, it's going to be the same moon. So the familiarity of something that you can see every night, it's a source of constancy and steadiness that that can be very reassuring. As you all must know, it's fascinating that we on Earth never really see the dark side of the moon, because the speed of the moon's revolution around the Earth is coordinated with the speed of rotation of the Earth. So it's kind of like the moon is turning around us at the same time as we're turning. So we're really seeing the same moon and the same side of the moon every night. I'll talk about this later, but as I, you know, initially it was a very, it was an interest that I had, but slowly I got to meet more people who are interested in astronomy, and it's been fascinating to see how, just like this group and all of us, these groups are so diverse. I mean, we're so different from each other in every other way, in the sense of age, gender, education, background, language, culture, and a whole host of other things. But it's this common human spirit or curiosity or wonder that unites all of us, and I find that really beautiful as well. And finally, like I said, I think for me, astronomy is also a form of spirituality, just because, again, of the scales that we're talking about. It, I think all the lessons that you know, religious or spiritual leaders talk about is really there. Impermanence, things, you know, we talk about the life cycle of stars, just like the life cycle of people. I think there's a lot of introspection that can be done when one just looks up in silence. And more recently, I've come to realize how universal this interest is. I mean, just from because my friends and extended circles know that I'm sort of interested in this subject. Of late, so many people have asked for, you know, it's also easier now than it ever was before to gain access to telescopes and books and things. And it's really amazing to see how many young children are interested. I mean, children as young as 3 or 4 are being introduced to astronomy and given resources to sort of look at the sky, which is really wonderful. And I also know so many older people who are now retired or have more time on their hands, who are spending more and more time investing in this as a pursuit. And that just tells me that, confirms what we know, that it's something of such universal interest. And it's really great to, share that. And it's really lovely to see how many people are now interested in this, and how accessible astronomy and amateur astronomy is becoming for everyone. So when people ask me, a couple of books that I have enjoyed reading, one, I think this is my favorite book of all time, is Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is actually a work of fiction. But I think it's really brilliant in how it takes a lot of concepts. It takes sort of the idea of exploration and thought and quirkiness, and kind of just injects a lot of humor and makes for very, very interesting reading for anyone who's interested in the idea of space travel, I guess. And the other book that I really found fascinating was Buzz Aldrin's book called Magnificent Desolation. He's written a couple of other books as well. As a lot of you might know, Buzz Aldrin was the third astronaut on board Apollo 11. And he's not as famous as Neil Armstrong, because in the order that people got down onto the moon, Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. But it's really amazing to have a first-person account of someone who actually sat on that on Apollo 11 and actually did walk on the moon as well, and everything that went into it. I feel very lucky that we have such a resource to read, and these are books that I think I came across later in life, and they find very prominent place in my bookshelf. In my journey, I guess I started out by saying it was, during the board exams that I was preparing, that I spent a lot of time on the terrace. But now I realize that even before that, I think there was something in the subject of physics that really drew me. There's this series of books called Dead Famous. There's a publication called Scholastic that my mother was actually, associated with in those days. And I got my hands on these books. And one of those books was this book by Mike Goldberg called Dead Famous and the Life of Albert Einstein. I think these books are really brilliant for kids, because what they do is they illustrate the lives and work of these really famous scientists in a very, very accessible way. So I think this is when I was in class 9, so I must have been about 15 years old, when through this book, I really did understand the basics of the principle of relativity and the theory of general relativity as well. But also it started out with much simpler concepts as well, such as the concept of relative velocity. So I remember then I was in school in class 9, and my physics teacher in class once gave us this example, and she's like, so if I say I'm not walking towards the Taj Mahal, but the Taj Mahal is walking towards me, am I a fool? And is there anyone in the class who says that makes sense? And I remember I was the only one who raised my hand. And when she asked me, I said, well, it's relative, right? If you consider yourself as fixed, then the Taj Mahal relatively is moving towards you. And I remember she asked me, what have you been reading? And I told her, well, this is the book. And it became really, it got passed around through the classroom, and everyone got their hands on it. So I think this is a really great series. I don't know if they're still in print. I really hope they are. They also have a similar series called Horrible Science, I think. They're just very accessible science and accessible astronomy. There's also one on Isaac Newton. And it was one of the books that I remember I'd spent all night staying up reading, and I'm not otherwise a night person. So that's one of the other reasons I thought I couldn't study astronomy professionally, but I'll talk more about that later. And then when I was on the terrace a lot, I remember my father took, a lot of interest, and he encouraged my hobby a lot, and he asked me what really excites me. And, I explained that it was astronomy, and I'll talk more about how that went forward. But even before, and he actually surprised me with my very first telescope, which I will talk about, but that really for me was a starting point. And in those days, I remember we didn't know much. It wasn't like today where we can sit and research the different kinds of telescopes and we ask people. And, I don't know the process by which he selected the one he got for me, but it's a relatively small one. It's very portable. It's a very, very basic one, but it's the one that I have till today. So it's been, I guess, a decade and a half. But even before I got the telescope, I think just wandering about on a terrace, you can begin to identify some of the basic constellations. Again, I was in Patna, which is in Bihar. It's a non-metro town in those days. It didn't have a lot of things, but what it did have was less pollution and clear skies. So I, just naturally out of familiarity rather than any, I guess we didn't have the internet back in those days, at least not the kind of access that we have now. I don't think I had very specialized books either, but just by virtue of being there and seeing them every night, you can begin to trace the basic constellation. So I remember for me, again, it was this sense of constancy. I would go there and feel reassured that these objects were still there in the night sky at the predicted time and at the predicted places. So for me, it was the Big Dipper and Orion, which are, I guess, in the Northern Hemisphere, some of the most conspicuous constellations. Within Orion, there's Betelgeuse, which is a star that's slightly reddish in color. So again, easy to spot. I felt super proud to know that, when people would hear astronomy and looking at the sky, they would be like, oh, so which is the pole star? Because everyone, for some reason, thinks that the pole star is the brightest star in the sky, but that's not the case. So the brightest star is Sirius, which is also called the dog star. And I would look at Cassiopeia, and I guess it's just, it's very nice to be able to identify these basic constellations. And then I used to be on the hunt for any astronomy resources that I could lay my hands on. So there was a secondhand bookseller that I would often go to, and I remember once finding an astronomy encyclopedia with him. And it was really amazing to be able to lay my hands on that. And, then that's where you would see the star charts and things like that. And just out of interest, so there's always been some kind of astronomy related memorabilia around me. I remember growing up, so I had glow stars, which I'd put on my ceilings. And then, so I guess it's just fun because when you're trying to learn something for its own sake, because you're interested, it's very different than, at least the kind of learning that we often had in school, which was having to learn things by heart to reproduce them for an exam. This was, again, going back to just trying to understand how things work and putting things in perspective and learning who we are and where we come from and things like that. So as I said, when I got my first telescope, that really was amazing. I had, luckily my parents were very supportive. My father would often spend time with me on the terrace trying to, we tried to figure out how magnification, resolution, focusing works. Again, it's very simple, it's very basic. So it's not difficult at all, but it's fascinating because I just couldn't stop looking first at the moon. The first time that you see the craters on the moon, it's fascinating. And I remember this one time when I was just standing there in a very awkward position, bent a certain way because I had to do that in order to see. And it struck me then, we know it in our heads, but it really struck me that that's another world out there. I mean, all we know is the Earth, and we talk about travel, but here I'm looking at something that, I mean, for all I know, someone else could be, sitting or standing up there and looking back through a telescope. And I don't know, the idea of looking at the moon through a telescope and imagining it as another world was really, really fascinating for me. I also saw what we call moonshine and also earthshine, which is a small band of light that, that you can see around the moon. So these are the kind of things that I began to observe. And as I did that, so I moved beyond the moon, and what else could I see? So everything else relatively is much, much, much smaller. But then we learn again in school that stars twinkle and planets don't. So there are a few planets that you can see with the naked eye, Mars being the most conspicuous because of its size and its reddish color. Venus also, because it's so bright when it's there in the sky. I learned that Venus is called the morning star and the evening star because that's when it shows up in the sky. And to see that applied reading in real life, when you just have to step out and look up with the naked eye. But through the telescope, I remember, so I started looking at this one bright spot, planet. I didn't know that was a planet. I didn't know what it was. And I got really excited because there was this one dot, and then there were four little dots around it. And I don't know what came over me, but I took a piece of paper and a pen and I started mapping it. And I began to realize that these four dots around the bigger dot are changing position around the bigger dot every night or every couple of nights. I mean, it would always be there. It would always be on the same spot, but the four dots would revolve around the central dot. And I, in my innocence, got very excited and thought I had managed to see another solar system, and that's another star with like four other planets around it. And it's only later that I realized what I was looking at was Jupiter with four of its most prominent moons. I also managed to see the rings of Saturn for the first time, and that, I don't know, I guess it was a turning point. It's just so beautiful when you see it. And I remember the biggest joke that people cracked with me when they saw me on my terrace with my little telescope was, "Oh, you're looking into people's windows." I was like, "No, I have much bigger things to look at." So I guess that's one lesson: when you're on a terrace with a telescope, you shouldn't be a creep. I've put together two images. So this is an image I took off the internet, and the source is here, but this is just to show all of you what I was looking at when I was looking at Jupiter. It's much smaller. This image is expanded quite a bit. What I saw was this, but much smaller. And it was really fascinating to see this, at regular intervals and see how these four moons were changing position around Jupiter. I mean, the fact that it's so simple for an amateur astronomer to like just go out and be able to see this is really amazing. And that's Saturn. That's what it looks like from a very basic beginner telescope. And that's what I saw as well. So these three, I mean, the moon and Jupiter and Saturn were, I guess, and still remain my favorite things to look at if I ever look through a telescope. I mean, nowadays, I guess, with more fancy technology and with more professional equipment, people look at stars and perhaps even planets that one can't even see with the naked eye. But I think there's some magic to doing that work yourself, to shifting the telescope around and having to move it every so often, because these are moving objects. They move across the sky. So you can't just fix your telescope and stay there. You have to keep moving with it. So doing that work, I think, just makes it more magical somehow. And then after class 10, I chose science. I got decent grades in class 10, so I had the option of choosing science, which in those days, at least, we had three streams. We had science, commerce, and arts. And people were just like, if you had the grades, of course, you need to go for science. But everyone was there either because they wanted to get into medical school or engineering school. I think I was the only one there who was there because I actually liked science. And I felt like a huge, I was a huge misfit because of that, because I wasn't taking, tuition for medical entrances or engineering entrance exams post my school day. And that was really, that was a bit crazy because no one in those days had really heard of astronomy as such. No, at least not in the circles that I was in. So if someone was in science class with me, it was because they were preparing for one of these exams, or they were studying physics because they had a paper to clear. And I don't think I was lucky enough to have people who or co-students who enjoyed physics for astronomy. I mean, I remember the chapter on gravitation was my favorite chapter in those days. And I shifted to Kolkata for my 11th and 12th. And I remember then getting terrace access was fairly hard. So I befriended the family that had terrace access. And I remember I bothered them once every month to take my trusty telescope, again, the portable one that I had from Patna. And I managed to, look at the sky. But what's really amazing is when you do that, and that this happened with me, is people get curious. They're like, oh, you want terrace access? Okay, for what? Oh, you want to look at the sky. And then sometimes, someone will come along with you. And that's how it spreads. I mean, now there are so many people in my family and friends who, I think, who look at the sky much more than they used to. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that, if they can see someone else who's interested, it ignites that innate curiosity in everyone. So I really wanted to study astronomy. Again, I was lucky in that my family was very supportive of it. Unfortunately, in those days, it just wasn't as popular as it is today. So we weren't able to find, the right courses or, the right way to go. And then, like I mentioned, I'm not really a stay awake at night person. So I thought, oh, it's okay. I mean, it wouldn't have suited me anyway. But now, I was just reading an article on this the other day that professional astronomers, I believe, spend a lot of time just looking at data. So they have office jobs. So in a way, I'm kind of glad I kept it as a hobby because it gives me the freedom to, not mess my head up with numbers more than I need to, and just go out and keep gazing at the wonder that really connects me to the subject. And so I moved on with the resolve that no matter what I was going to do, this is something that I was going to pursue and keep pursuing. And luckily, it is something that you can do no matter what else you're doing in life, academically or professionally. So that's when I went into law school instead. And law school is about as far as you can get from science itself and from astronomy for sure. But I had my telescope with me. And I remember the first chance I got, there was a lunar eclipse. And I was staying in hostel and there was a terrace that we had. So I just set up my telescope and there was an observation session an informal one that I conducted for anyone who was interested. So we had people in their night suits coming out all blurry eyed and being like, what is going on? I remember it was a red moon also that we had also, sorry, not a lunar eclipse, but like a red moon, which was a penumbral shadow. So that was very exciting as well. And then, although our law school library was full of legal texts, and we had these racks where there would be, constitutional law rack and environmental law rack and all these different kinds of laws. And then in one corner, we had one rack of books called the science rack. So I had books related to science. And that's where I found, encyclopedias and almost mint fresh copies of Stephen Hawking's Universe in a Nutshell. So when it all got too much for me, I would just find myself a quiet corner in the library and I would open his thesis on time. And that's it. That would be my sanctuary, my half an hour or 1 hour away in my own world. And somewhere in the middle of law school, I found my way to the Birla Planetarium, which is located fairly centrally in Kolkata. That's my first foray into planetariums. I realized they're wonderful in that in every city that I've been in subsequently, I've always gravitated to the planetarium as that's going to be one source where people who are interested in astronomy will gather. So, and it's targeted towards, the general public. So it's the perfect space for amateur astronomers. In Kolkata at the time I was there, I was just really, really lucky to make the acquaintance of the director of the Birla Planetarium, Dr. Duari, who's an amazing gentleman with a great passion for astronomy and for teaching astronomy as well. He was conducting free evening classes on astronomy for amateurs, for complete learners, every Tuesday evening. And I remember for that entire year, those Tuesday evenings were the best part of my week. So I was there diligently and just listening to him speak. He was speaking, to beginners. He was explaining basic astronomy concepts. And the And the light in his eyes and his face when he spoke about these ideas was exactly what I love about astronomy. It's again, it's that sense of amazement and wonder that that we have when we think about these things. It's not really the technicalities of how telescopes work, or even astrophotography, which is amazing and a great way to capture the magic. But one doesn't get lost in the details of the specifications, but really in the concepts that we're talking about. We're talking about scales of time and of space. And, again, like things that I think the human mind couldn't have dreamed up. And I still think it's fascinating because despite all we know so little. I mean, so it's an endless challenge. And it was really, really a blessing for me to be able to attend those Tuesday evening classes. I remember that's when I also had my first overnight observation session. So I was super excited about that. We took a train away from Kolkata, which is again a city, in search of darker sky. So we went about an hour away by local train. Again, it was a super diverse group of people. Some of us didn't even speak the same language. There were a lot of Bengali speaking people because it was Kolkata. I understand only bits and pieces of the language, but we all were so connected because we were all there for the same thing. And so there's a kind of camaraderie that builds up, and we stayed awake half the night. There were mosquitoes. We didn't care. We learned about, what light pollution means for every amateur astronomer. I think anyone who's trying to look at the sky, we begin to really get annoyed with city lights. And when you're in a dark sky location, you have to use like a red filter, so maybe a red cellophane or something, whenever you're using even a torch or your mobile phone. Just because the eyes get adjusted to the dark, your pupils tend to dilate and you don't want to disturb that. So often when you're looking at the sky, this is again something I discovered firsthand, is if you look a little bit away, that's when you see more. You keep looking and your eyes adjust to the darkness and you see more. So that's again something that also astronomy again gets connected with different kinds of outdoor activities. So just being outdoors, if you're camping or you're doing rock climbing or something, I think anyone who's into any kind of outdoor activity as well will have that chance to look up. And once you look up, I'm sure you'd be fascinated. Me being me, even though I was doing law, I couldn't give up the idea of staying connected with space. And in the middle of law school, I think I had the opportunity to actually study a subject called space law, which is a whole thing. I don't know if people are aware, but we have things such as the Moon Treaty and the Outer Space Treaty and about 3 other treaties. And it's very interesting. There are concepts such as, celestial objects and outer space are the common heritage of all mankind, and very grandiose concepts like that. But it's more, again, to do with very human instincts, which law tends to regulate, such as, so if we land on the moon or we land on Mars and we're the first ones there, is that going to be our land? So we look at it in the same framework that we look at ownership rights on Earth. So I guess it's really fascinating, but it's not as fascinating for me as astronomy itself, because it doesn't really deal with the wonder. But at the same time, there are certain concepts that I think are very, very important, and things that I would want to study more if and when I do study more about space law, such as the environmental damage that we're causing. So there's a whole layer of space debris that we have put out there. So junk from our outer space explorations, which is just sort of rotating in a band around the Earth, and which is becoming a real threat to us and to future space activity as well. So that's an area that's open and that's fascinating, and that I hope to learn more about in future. So that was the end of my studies, and I moved to Delhi. I was working at a law firm there. Again, I attached myself to the Nehru Planetarium, which is also, again, centrally located in Delhi. That's where I had the chance to become part of this organization called the Amateur Astronomers Association of Delhi. In those days, they used to meet every Sunday at noon, I think, for films and discussions on astronomy. It was really amazing, again, to meet and connect with other amateur astronomers, people who were interested, and people who just wanted to talk about fascinating concepts in astronomy. They also had observation sessions for every time there was a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. There were people with far better equipment than I had and that were willing to share, which was a great opportunity to see and learn more. And then much later in 2016, I had the chance to be part of a telescope making workshop. So that picture is actually a picture of the telescope that I helped to make. This is a 10-inch Dobsonian telescope. Mr. Ajay Talwar, who led the workshop, taught, I think there were 10 telescopes, if I remember correctly, being made simultaneously. So we learned how to cut the board and make the measurements and do those ray diagrams and things. And this one is still I believe, at the planetarium. So another fellow amateur astronomer and I together had the opportunity to help make this telescope. And I had the maximum fun painting it as well. That was really fun. We did some more observation trips. I think AAAD still does a lot of these. It's still a great center for people to meet and talk and share astronomy-related conversations. It's also the first time I met other people who were in the profession of law and also interested in astronomy, which was really great for me because I always felt like I was probably the only one there, which is far, far from the truth. And it was my introduction to astrophotography. This is the first time I saw and was lucky enough to be around people who taught me how star trails are actually made. So star trails are when you leave a camera, when you expose your camera to the night sky at a specific location for a long period of time. As we know, stars move in the night sky. And so regular interval photographs, if mapped and together, actually show the movement of a star or a bunch of stars across the sky over the course of a night. It makes for fascinating pictures. And I was part of one trip that we made to the Qutub Minar in Delhi, where the Qutub Minar was actually the stationary object in the photo. So that stayed the same through the night, and all the stars kind of revolved around it. And it's really fascinating. A couple of years later, I had a chance to go abroad and live in New York City. I was doing my master's in law, actually. It was the first time not the first time. I'd also been to Australia for a quick trip related to studying earlier as well. And again, from an astronomy perspective, it was really fascinating for the first time to see another sky, to see the southern hemisphere. So there are different constellations, and to be aware, I don't know, I guess when you think in astronomy related terms, even when I went to New York and that was my first time in the United States, all I could think was, oh my God, I'm on the other side of the planet. So literally like I'm standing upside down. That's how your mind begins to think, and it just makes everything a little more fascinating and exciting. I also got in touch with the Amateur Astronomers Association of New York. They organized a couple of events as well. That picture is from one of the events that was organized at Central Park, which is a huge park in the center of New York City, where they'd set up a bunch of really like these state-of-the-art telescopes, and anyone and everyone could just come by and have a look at the sky. So I think parks are also an amazing space for astronomy enthusiasts to come together. And I think people in this field are also very generous with sharing access to their fancy equipment, if you ask nicely enough. I also had the chance to take a trip again to a dark sky region. In the US, there's one called the Cherry Springs State Park. So again, these are areas where the light pollution is very low, and people go there typically because they're interested in looking at the sky undisturbed. And that's when you can see the Milky Way. And that's, again, a very, very fascinating. You don't need any equipment for it. You just need to be in an area where there's no light pollution. So I think the first time I actually saw the Milky Way was when I was camping for the first time. This was on a hilltop in Himachal Pradesh. And just all you have to do is peek out of the tent at, any time after midnight, and you can see the band of light, which is the Milky Way. And again, it just makes you realize your place in the galaxy. And it's fascinating. While I was in the US, I also had a chance to go to the Smithsonian Museum. One of the most wonderful things they have there, I guess, is a rock from the moon that was brought back during one of the moon missions. And I had the opportunity to touch it. I've put in a lot of pictures from that just because it's so exciting for me. I say my life was divided into before I touched the moon rock and after. It's fascinating because, when you think about it, you're touching an object from another world. And I'm really grateful to have had that opportunity. Now I'm based in Bangalore. I work out of Bangalore. I am lucky to, again, be around the Nehru Planetarium, but of course now, it being COVID times, it'll be a while before I think we're able to access it again. I have a friend who is, I think, on the call, who actually helped connect me to this group and this talk, who's also introduced me to a couple of Bangalore-related astronomy groups. Like I said, I've associated myself a little bit with space law, so there are a couple of conferences that I hope to attend to engage with space law. India, I think, is also considering a space law legislation that's in the works. And there's always some kind of astronomy-related merchandise around. So right now, that's my laptop and my phone. This is a painting that I made. It's an artist's impression. So, like I said, it's also it tends to be an inspiration for creativity. So, this is one of the paintings that I like the most. This is a poem that I wrote a while back. I can share it with the group later if you're interested, but I can also read it out quickly for all of you. It's a homage to the moon, and I call it My Moon. Unlike the religious Hindus around me, I never paid homage to the moon with diyas and rituals and dressing up. But I knew her every phase more intimately than all those who watched only for Purnima when she was resplendent in her fullness. They looked at calendars first, and then to gurus on TV, and lately to apps on their smartphones to tell them when the time was right. I looked straight at her. Even as a girl, I looked to the moon and projected moods onto her. I spoke in earnest in my heart to her. In soliloquies on the terrace, my face always up. And I never felt lonely because I knew that no matter where I was on the planet, I'd still get to look at the same moon, and she would know me. Now I've been to the other side of the world and back, and looked at her and felt at home. My feet have no home. And somehow I feel connected in those moments. Even as I spin through timeless space, stuck on a rock, caught in an inescapable orbital sentence around an insignificant sun. These are some Instagram accounts and some very cool articles that I've read and that I follow, and you're welcome to do the same. There's some cool facts out there, like this is a pink planet that I think was quite recently discovered. It's up on the NASA website. The two hashtags are two Instagram accounts that give me daily joy. Some of them are really, really cool animations that, again, bring out the wonder. There's so much astronomy related content out there, but I think these, at least Space Physics Geeks is one that talks about physics and astronomy. So some animations that show maybe things like the spin of different planets and things like that, which I think are amazing. And again, were not really possible maybe even 10 years ago. So it's really cool to be able to see that. And then there's this website called Wait But Why. I'm lucky enough again to be now friends with a whole group of very interesting people. And all we have in common is that we all read this website called Wait But Why. Not all of its content is related to astronomy, but some is. Two of them are one that deals with the Fermi paradox, and the other puts time in perspective. Again, these articles basically talk about things like, if there's intelligent life out there, why have we not come across them yet? And tries to actually engage with that question in a very logical, fun, and makes you think kind of way. The other puts time in perspective. So really, when we talk about scales in astronomy in terms of space and time, I think it's hard for our little brains to fathom the enormity of those units. And this blog has actually done a wonderful job of using basic timelines to show that. And it starts, I think, it ends up going as far back as the Big Bang, and as far into the future as well. So I'd encourage anyone who's interested to check out these links. I'd like to end with who I think is my personal favorite author, leader, thought leader, mentor through books and reading, and that's Carl Sagan. I'm fascinated, amazed, and absolutely bowled over by things that he's written and the ideas that he's had. I think my fascination with astronomy is really the kind of ideas that Carl Sagan talks about. I'm currently reading this book, which is Pale Blue Dot, which is a vision of the human future in space. I think the version of the book that I'm reading is filled with so many highlights and underlines that it'd be tedious for anyone else to read it. But it's just because every other paragraph is something that I feel like I want to write and frame up on my wall. I've extracted his most famous quote from that book. And this is talking about this little dot, which the arrow pointing to, you are here, the arrow points to a little dot. That's actually Earth. This is a picture that was taken from the Voyager 1 spacecraft when it first exited the solar system way back in 1990. And in this book, Carl Sagan actually describes how he was one of the people who encouraged this photo to be taken, where a lot of people felt that it was pointless to take this image because it wasn't part of the plan and it wasn't really supposed to add anything to what they were trying to actually discover around the edges of the solar system. But this has become one of the most iconic photographs because it helps us to self-reflect and again put ourselves in perspective. So I'll just read out his paragraph. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Thank you. That's all from me, and I'd be happy to engage with all of you. Thank you for your time, for listening, and thank you so much, Captain Anil, again, for giving me this opportunity. Be happy to take any questions.